In this video, we're going to go over pruning technique, and we're going to focus on the natural target pruning and the three-cut method. So objective, which we've covered in a previous video, is really important. You have to know why you're pruning. Are you trying to raise the crown for traffic to go underneath? Are you trying to make a stop sign more visible? Are you just pruning out some of the dead and dying or decaying branches? But technique is also important. Here you can see on these street trees, they left these giant stubs. There's a saying, if you can hang your hat on it, you probably didn't prune that branch properly. So you don't want to leave anything you can hang your hat or jacket on. And you can see in this right side over here that these are what would be lion's tailed. So they cleaned everything out. Now all the weight is on the top and this very slim branch, higher probability for that to tear out in a storm. So technique and how you actually do these and evaluate it is as important as the objective. Here we can see again some very poor technique. The branch weight was not taken off, and so as that branch got partway through the cut, you can see it tore off, and now it's torn into stem tissue and having a really difficult time keeping decay out of the trunk, which would lead up into this trunk. Remember, wall 1 is not particularly effective at blocking decay, and so that can cause significant issues here. This branch here, you can see where it was split together. This was done using a pole saw, where you came down from the top. Again, didn't alleviate or try to alleviate any of the weight, and as soon as the remainder of that branch had enough weight, it actually tore out, and this total distance is about 4 feet. So you can see that tear out can go quite a ways, and we'll look at how to use the three-cut method to minimize these issues. Natural target pruning, just as a reminder, you've got this branch bark ridge and you've got a branch collar potentially that has formed, and so you're trying to prune to the outside of the branch collar, and you don't want to cut into this branch bark ridge. Other methods do exist, but this is the one that's the most common in arboriculture, and so this is the one we'll focus on. Just to show you what it looks like on an actual, we've seen this image before, but here is a branch collar that is formed. If you were going to prune this, you'd prune it about right there. You can adjust this a little bit. A lot of times you can actually see it. It's very, very well formed branch collar. Sometimes this line might be more perpendicular to the branch itself, depending upon how advanced or how well formed that collar is. Usually when you see a branch collar that is formed that's this swollen and obvious, that's typically the tree branch itself is not keeping up with photosynthesis of the rest of the tree, and so eventually that branch would likely continue to minimize in growth or potentially even be kind of shaded out or killed off by the tree because it's not contributing enough to the whole of the tree, and so it's a good candidate for removal when you're looking at branches to remove. Why do this natural target pruning? We're trying to minimize decay, really, for our urban trees. Again, if you're timber production, you might have different objectives, but flush cutting is never okay, which is what we see here. Even when trying to produce good quality timber, flush cutting is not the method to use. And just think of it like this. Try to be lazy. You don't get to be lazy in a lot of things, but making this small cut is a lot easier than making this big cut. And so relax, make a smaller cut, right? Instead of making this bigger cut, takes more time. Here you can see again, pretty big cut and then no weight alleviated, and so there's a significant tear out down here, so we don't want to see that. You also want to keep in mind the aspect ratio of the branches, branch diameter to trunk diameter, so this would have a little bit stronger of an attachment. We do see there's no included bark. It looks like there's a formation of a branch bark ridge. Here it looks like bark is starting to become included, and these branches are about the same size, which means that under some sort of load event like wind, snow, rain, there's a higher probability of these branches tearing out at that union than you would see over here. The objective here with the three-cut method is to minimize any damage to the trunk tissue and to keep any potential decay or disease confined within just what would be remaining of that branch tissue so it doesn't spread throughout the entire tree. If you're using just a hand pruners, notice that the cutting edge of the hand pruners is often to the side, one side or the other. If you come down from the top of with the actual cutting edge, there can be a tendency to, as you put pressure on that, to either crush some of the remaining tissue or cause a tear out. Now, not as big a deal because you're typically using with hand pruners on pretty small branches, so we're not too concerned, but usually you come at it from the side and clip it that way. With the 3-cut method, the first thing you do is undercut, and then the second cut is to the outside of the undercut. What this is really doing is alleviating the weight of that branch before you get to your final cut. Now, as you're going through your second cut, most of the time, or if you've got a big enough branch, the weight will actually overcome the remaining holding strength of the wood, and it'll tear out or it'll break off, and it only breaks back right to that first cut. That prevents any tear outs coming down through and going into the stem and causing damage to the trunk wood. At the final cut, or before the final cut, you have just a very small bit of branch left, and so there's not going to be enough weight, and it's much easier to manage. Think if you're using this with a chainsaw, you can actually manage to push that away or have it tied off in such a way that allows you to maintain control of the saw and the branch as it's going through, and you can do the same thing with smaller equipment. An important thing to remember in doing this particular method is that you never want to touch this branch bark ridge with your saw, and these indicate a nice strong attachment. So here we'd actually go make the cut about right there and about right there. Here I'm demonstrating what happens when you don't use the 3-cut method. The weight of the branch can actually cause a tear out at that it's heavy enough it would tear out all the way back to the trunk tissue. Here I'll start the actual 3-cut method with a quick cut underneath, and then the second cut just to the outside, and when there's enough weight the branch will actually break itself, leaving no tear out. Then you can finish with your final cut just outside the branch collar, leaving a nice, round, symmetric wound. What if there is no branch collar present? What do you do then? How do you make this cut? So some of these slides I'm going to show are from research done by Jake Miesbauer from the Morton Arboretum, and it's still ongoing, and they hope to publish some of the results soon. Here is Jake. Basically, they pruned a lot of branches, and then he dissected them all to look at how decay or disease had actually moved through based on what angle of cut they'd actually made. So perpendicular branch to minimize the cut. So here you can see if a roughly 90-degree angle, if you want to make the smallest cut as possible, you'd cut right here. So about 90 degrees to that branch itself. That would minimize the cuts. You'd have a much smaller wound. What they noticed is that on some species, when they did that, so here this would have been that 90-degree smallest wound possible, you'll notice that the collar tissue starts to form here and down here, and that decay is most on this outer side and least as it gets in, indicating that possibly an angled cut would have actually reduced the amount of decay. And really the tree isn't starting to grow new tissue over until you get down to this side anyway. So if you drew a line between where the callus tissue is forming to the callus tissue above and below, you see that you actually get more of an angled cut. And same thing here, callus tissue just starting to form and just starting to form here. If we'd have cut something like this, you're always going to have a little bit of decay in there because it's just exposed wood that's no longer functional. But we could minimize that amount of decay, which would be right here, and potentially have a faster close. This tissue from this side here would have to actually grow all the way up and over before that wound is fully sealed. If we'd cut it like this, then the tissue just needs to cover that surface. So surface area actually becomes a little bit less when we consider how much decay is potentially going. So they did a 45 degree to take a look at that, And here you can see when they're done the 45-degree, callus tissue formation, and decay is a little bit smaller. So dysfunctional wood is asymmetric with more of that dysfunctional or decaying wood below the pith of the branch, which would make sense from how the tree is actually developing and putting on new wood as it continues to grow. So a quick summary to pruning. You want to prune early to develop good structure, and that allows us to make small pruning wounds which can really minimize decay. You want to selectively remove branches that have included bark where you can, or reduce those branches to remove some of the weight from them. You want to remove or minimize or reduce codominant leaders, again, to prevent from or to reduce the probability of future failure. Certainly remove any decayed or diseased branches or dead branches, and you want to maximize photosynthesis for the tree, so don't over prune.